Welcome back, everyone. We are continuing the First Crusade. We have basically 2 more videos to go. This is like the after effects of the Crusade. This chapter is called First Jihad Against the Crusaders, Battle of Shaizir 1111. So I guess that's the Seljuk Turks. We'll have to see. Let's jump.
Most of its manpower and resources, the Seljuk Empire was now in the hands of Muhammad I Tapar. However, this state was more of a loose confederation that the new Sultan had to consolidate, as many Atabegs were fully autonomous and pursued their own interests. The 2 most important examples for our story are the last remaining powerhouses in the Levant, Damascus and Aleppo.
Even though Aleppo doesn't have like its own territory, it's just like a city.
They too saw a major shift in policy after Dukak of Damascus died of tuberculosis in 1104. And here once again we are reminded of how important it is to have a healthy heir of age, as one of his officers, Tughtekin, took the opportunity to rise above his station by deposing his junior son, Tutush II, exiling his brother, and marrying his widowed wife. In one swift move, Tughtekin founded the Burid dynasty, which would rule the city for 50 years.
It's pretty honorable.
This new change could potentially mean an end to the Damascus-Aleppo rivalry, but in reality their relationship became even tenser. In 1105, the final link between the Crusaders and Byzantines was broken, as Raymond of Toulouse died from injuries he sustained while laying siege to Tripoli.
Oh, we don't even get to see that, or see how that went down. He just died laying siege to Tripoli? Dang. Alright, Alexios, who do you turn to now? Tancred? You got Tancred, you got Baldwin. Who else you got? Bohemond is dead from the last episode. Might still be alive in this look back. I don't know. I can't remember. I don't know who's next.
Alexios had made a substantial investment, making him a vassal and allowing him to carve up Tripoli for himself, while maintaining an imperial claim over it and the rest of the region. Raymond was succeeded by his 2-year-old son Alfonso, but once again his nephew, William II Jordan, Count of Sardinia, took his chance and seized control. Raymond was the richest of all the Crusaders, who supplied the most amount of resources, as well as the engineers who managed to turn the tide in multiple sieges. But on his deathbed, his ambition of a leading role in the Holy Land was unfulfilled. Whether he knew about the change in power or not, the Emir of Aleppo, Ridwan, assembled an army aimed at relieving Tripoli, after the Qadi ruling the city called to his aid. But on his way there, he was notified of another development. The city of Arta, which had rebelled against Tancred, sided with Aleppo and expelled the city's garrison, was now under siege. Ridwan marched towards the city, and once the Crusader camp was in range, he ordered a full-scale attack. The Crusaders retreated, abandoning their camp, but while the enemy had already resorted to looting, they were set upon by a greater force. Apparently, after witnessing the feigned retreat maneuver so many times, the Crusaders decided to employ it, and did it to great effect. The numbers of participants in the Battle of Arta are exaggerated, but what we know for sure is that the majority of Ridwan's untrained infantry was slaughtered after the Frankish cavalry dominated their Seljuk counterparts, leaving the flanks exposed.
Yeah, the feigned retreat is just so deadly, because you don't know if they're retreating, and you want to finish them off, or if they're baiting.
Tancred and his men proceeded to chase down their foes all the way to Aleppo, looting the countryside as they went. Ridwan would remain in power for another 8 years, but after this engagement, he would no longer be a threat to the Crusaders. The Principality of Antioch was secured, but to the south, the Kingdom of Jerusalem was facing a far greater foe.
The Fatimids. It's got to be the Fatimids. Damascus hasn't really done anything. It's got to be the Fatimids.
The Fatimids were hoping to settle the score and break the Ramla tie that same year. For the 5th year in a row, a large army, between 10 and 12,000, was assembled and marched against the crucial point between Ascalon and Jerusalem. However, this time, they were supported by a strong contingent of Seljuk horse archers, in a rare moment of collaboration between the two states. The Fatimids made Baldwin bleed 3 years prior, and now wanted to finish the job with the biggest army since Ascalon. Sadly, for those of us who enjoy sophisticated formations and exciting battles, this would prove to be yet another disappointment.
Why?
By this point, these continuous engagements were becoming part of everyday life in the Levant, and the chroniclers spare very few words for this engagement that raged
Oh, so they didn't think this was anything special. Okay.
on for almost a day. What we do know is that Baldwin took charge of a far smaller force, repelled an attack from the rear, then came back and led a final charge that broke the enemy. The Egyptian camp was looted, and the Third Battle of Ramla was won. To their credit, the Fatimids were not a weak opponent, nor did they lack the will or the means to crush the Latins. Between 1099 and 1118, they launched major invasions that included naval support. In 1099, 1101, 1102, 1103, 1105 and 1118, with smaller raiding parties sent out in 1104, 1106, 1107, 1108, 1110, 1111, 1113 and 1115.
So they did it like a ton of times.
This means that in 19 years, the Kingdom of Jerusalem had to fight off at least 14 assaults, while laying siege to multiple cities, dealing with internal disputes.
I don't know if that's like a lot for like this time period, but it seems like it's probably a lot.
Italian merchant cities, Byzantines, and the Seljuks. Keep in mind that after Ascalon, the Crusaders never fielded more than 1,000 knights. Usually, their army consisted of around 500, supported by a few thousand infantry and archers.
Okay.
When compared with data from other campaigns, such as those against the Sultanate of Rum, Byzantines, and Seljuks, it is hard to draw a conclusion that disputes how brutally effective the Frankish knights really were.
I mean, they got better armor. They're definitely better defensively.
And through this period, the Crusader States were fighting for survival, not dominance, since every city had to be garrisoned, and supply lines were constantly disrupted. One can only imagine how different things could have been if either the alliance with Byzantium was preserved, the Crusade of 1101 featuring 10,000 knights arrived in the Levant, or if Bohemond's crusading force sailed to Antioch instead of Dyrrhachium.
Alright, let's break these three down. The Byzantium one. Yeah, like they would be prioritized. They would be prioritized by the Imperial Kingdom, or Imperial Empire. Imperial Empire is redundant. They would have all the resources. Alexios would call on nations of the Balkans, and if he needed to, like, yeah, that's the obvious one. The Knights, that's the one that should have happened, but they really wanted Bohemond. I think that was Bohemond that was captured. So yeah, that would have helped. It wouldn't have been it wouldn't have been as effective as just being more aligned with Byzantium. The last one, that was never going to happen. That was too personal.
Speaking of the Crusade of 1101, the Seljuk Sultan of Rum, Kilij Arslan, had vanquished more Latins than he could count, so he felt secure enough to launch his own campaign against them.
Oh.
His forces initially tried to take Edessa, but after assessing its strong fortifications, he decided to turn on his Danishmend allies.
Oh.
Upon his arrival at Haran, the city surrendered to him, and Diyarbakir quickly followed. These victories emboldened the Sultan. From his perspective, everyone around him was falling apart, so when he was presented with an opportunity to expand his domain even further by taking control of Mosul, a key city that recently changed hands after a brutal assassination,
that's a decent track that he's making.
He went for it. The Sultanate of Rum did manage to conquer the city, but not for long. The Seljuk Sultan assembled a coalition that featured Ilghazi of the Artukids and Ridwan of Aleppo, who managed to defeat Kilij Arslan in the field. In his attempt to escape, another great figure of the story met his demise as he drowned in a river. To make matters worse, his son Malik Shah was held prisoner at the time, leaving the fate of Anatolia in the balance.
Yeah, there's a power vacuum now there.
Around this time, while Bohemond was laying siege to Dyrrhachium, Tancred took the opportunity to advance his holdings since the Byzantines were busy defending the Balkans against Bohemond. And so, in 1108, Tancred assaulted the key cities of Laodicea, Tarsus, Adana and Mamistre, shifting the regional balance of
Yeah, we've seen this go change hands like 3 times now.
power yet again. As for Alexios, one might assume that fending off a Crusader invasion led by one of the most cunning men in medieval history, who wanted to conquer Constantinople itself, would mean he had his hands full. But as usual, he was one step ahead.
That territory, though, in forgot what you call that the mainland of Greece. There's like a certain name. That territory right there, it's so much different than the territory in the Levant, just geographically and just like how you would fight.
Raymond's death was a significant loss, but the emperor was willing to go all in and offered rich gifts to both claimants of Tripoli. On the one hand, there was William Jordan, who received and ignored his embassy, but on another, there was Bertrand, Raymond's eldest son, who sailed east on Genoese ships at the head of a 4,000-strong army that raided Thessaly.
Why do they always raid? Why do they always raid the guy that's giving them gifts?
Normally, this would have been severely punished, but Alexios knew how to turn enemies into allies. So instead, he invited him to the imperial court, where he offered rich gifts instead of an oath of vassalage, which Bertrand,
the great chess player Alexios,
accepted. The Provençal then sailed to Antioch, where he met Tancred. The Principality of Antioch had seized some of the lands under Raymond's control, so naturally Bertrand asked for their return. The Norman agreed, but only if the Provençal army helped him against the Byzantines. In a rare show of loyalty to one's word, Bertrand refused, suggesting that they take Gibel from the Seljuks instead, but Tancred was uninterested. Bertrand departed empty-handed and made his way to Tripoli, where he found William's siege camp and a
William's here. He's like, yeah, I'm interested now. He looks like he's 18, by the way.
conflict erupted over succession rights. The situation started to spiral out of control, so outside forces got involved.
Could be William's claim, really.
Baldwin decided to mediate the conflict and offered a resolution where once the city was taken, its lands would be divided equally between them. The two sides begrudgingly agreed, and Bertrand was then made to swear another oath of vassalage, but this time to Baldwin, while William turned to the aid of Tancred, creating a cold proxy war between the Crusader States.
Whoa, there's a Cold War in 1108? No way.
Then on July 12, 1109, the Crusaders, supported by the Genoese fleet, made an assault and successfully captured Tripoli. The resistance was strong and many men lost their lives, but most notably, William sustained an injury to which he succumbed in days.
Oh, so it's all Bertrand's then.
Suddenly, Tripoli had only one ruler, who owed his allegiance to both Jerusalem and Constantinople.
At least not Tancred. Alexios and Baldwin. Interesting.
Unfortunately for Tancred, his sphere of influence was diminished even further after both Jocelyn of Courtenay and Baldwin of Bourg were ransomed in 1107 and 1108. During their absence, Antioch held control over Edessa, but now that they were free, they refused to bend the knee to him, especially since Bohemond was nowhere to be seen. The two then openly went to war against each other, with Baldwin seeking aid from an Armenian king who supplied him with an army and 300 Pecheneg mercenary riders. These
Tancred, if he survives this, he's just been through it.
punitive raids caused severe damage to Tancred's lands and angered his subjects, which led to the clergy getting involved. A council was formed, and the prelates ruled in Baldwin's favour, restoring his rights as Count of Edessa, a semi-autonomous Crusader state under the vassalage of the Kingdom of Jerusalem.
Ah, so Baldwin's the hierarchy, or the top of the hierarchy.
4 considerable Crusader victories mark the following year of 1110. First, in the spring, a large army assembled by the Atabeg of Mosul.
What's Malik Shah doing? He was the son of Jocelyn. I don't know what he's doing though.
Attempted to lay siege to Edessa, but was forced to retreat after King Baldwin arrived with a relief force. Then, after a 2-month blockade, Baldwin, Genoa and Pisa assaulted and brutally sacked Beirut, killing most of its inhabitants.
Dang.
Fatimid ships from Tyre and Sidon tried to break the blockade, but were unsuccessful. Then in October, Baldwin welcomed the first ever European monarch to visit the Crusader States, King Sigurd I of Norway.
Norway? That's an expedition to get over here. Okay. Yeah, Viking?
Whose incredible adventure story deserves its own video that we hope to make in the future. After stopping by England, Iberia and Sicily, the Norwegian king finished his pilgrimage by praying in Jerusalem, bathing in the river Jordan, and laying siege to Sidon.
Of course, gotta lay siege.
This time, however, the Fatimid fleet nearly broke their navy, but a last-minute action by a Venetian squadron under Doge Faliero saved the expedition. Sidon fell on December 4th after surrendering to Baldwin. And then, finally, Tancred led his own assault against the castle that would end up becoming Crac de Chevalier, solidifying his domain.
So Tancred's back. He's feeling good. Bertrand, he does have, like, I guess, allegiance with Baldwin, so he doesn't feel squeezed, but he's definitely getting pressure up top.
By this point, Bohemond had signed the Treaty of Devil, but did nothing to enforce it. Alexios offered him an annual salary of 200 gold pounds, the title of Sebastos, and a generous amount of land, as long as he held them in his name, but the Norman didn't even write a letter to Tancred. Alexios opened Pandora's box, and was now willing to do anything to close it. So he started writing letters and sending gifts. In 1110, the Pisans were approached and offered not just an end to hostilities, but special trading privileges, similar to the ones he granted to the Venetians. Normally, merchants had to pay a 10% tax, and while the 4%
like a tariff
he offered wasn't as good as the 0% Venice paid, it was still a bargain. Additionally, Pisa would receive yearly payments from the empire, special legal rights, titles, and lucrative trade opportunities. In return, the merchant city agreed to become a Byzantine vassal and assist them in war. The treaty that both sides signed has survived and illustrates many important points. Nor will we, inhabitants of the city and land of Pisa, combine with any other person or people at enmity with you for the purpose of taking from you your empire, whether Romania or any other lands or islands which you hold under your imperial power, now or from this time forth, in Croatia, Dalmatia or Dyrrachium, as far as Alexandria itself.
It's really cool that we still have that account right here. Really cool.
Note that Alexios was not simply interested in reclaiming Anatolia and Antioch. His ultimate goal was a full restoration of the Eastern Roman Empire. To get there, he signed a
Dang, that's ambitious. That means the Fatimids, the Levant. Whoa.
Deal with the same state that pillaged his trade ports and assisted his enemies. But why did the emperor choose Pisa over Genoa, alienating his Venetian allies? The wording of this treaty, and what followed after, reveals that Alexios was planning a massive invasion of the Crusader States. And since the Pisan archbishop was exiled from his post in Jerusalem, they made the ideal ally. The negotiations stalled, and the Byzantine royal decree affirming the new rights was only issued in late 1111, after Lombard, Genoese and Pisan ships raided the Dardanelles. Another indication of Alexios' ambitions was his embassy to the Pope. The emperor expressed his sympathy and spoke harshly against the Holy Roman Emperor Henry V, who openly threatened the papacy, offering Byzantine troops to guard the Eternal City. He even suggested the possibility of a church union and an end to the schism.
No way.
The Pope, however, wasn't interested.
Yeah, no way.
The next correspondence is based on slim evidence, but some records show that Alexios sent letters to the Sultan in Baghdad, incentivizing him to attack the Crusader States.
That would make no sense, I don't believe that.
In the meantime, the most serious diplomatic work was entrusted to the general Butimites, who in 1111 sailed to Cyprus with a fleet of 12 ships laden with supplies and gold. His first stop was Tripoli, where Bertrand welcomed him and provided storage for the vast treasury. He reaffirmed his oath to Alexios and was ready to go to war with him, provided that he arrive personally at the gates of Antioch. Once word got out, Baldwin called Butimites and began negotiating with him. The idea was to form a coalition against Antioch, one which the King of Jerusalem was willing to join.
Tancred's just going through it.
But only after Alexios gave him a large quantity of gold and provided naval support. Giving so many resources to a potential enemy while receiving nothing seemed more like a scam than a bad deal, so talks continued for almost a year without progress. During that same period, Butimites approached Jocelyn of Courtenay with the same idea, but he refused. By this point it was 1112, and the ruler of Tripoli died, leaving his 14-year-old son Pons as the Count of Tripoli.
We've seen this story. There's no way Pons is going to last.
Yet again, a regency complicated things, and upon his return, when Butimites asked to access his treasury, the local bishop refused him. Suddenly there was a standoff. Despite threatening to cut off the grain trade for Cyprus, the money was never returned. Instead, the council sent Pons to Antioch so that Tancred could become his mentor, and that the relations between the two Crusader states could be mended. The following year, not only did Butimites return empty-handed, but the Venetians showcased their resentment of the Byzantine deal with Pisa by requesting aid for their invasion of Dalmatia. Despite affirming his claim over the region, Alexios begrudgingly agreed, but managed to stall and delay the potential invasion for another day. The emperor was
Alexios is dealing with so much right now.
An old man, and with Malik Shah free from captivity, major raids in
Malik Shah's a man now.
Anatolia continued to threaten his rear. The clock was ticking, and their diplomacy was starting to prove inefficient.
Oh no.
Then, either due to the Byzantines' machinations or pure coincidence, in 1111, every single Crusader state rallied together and stood firm against a massive expedition
So we're going back in time.
Launched by the Seljuk Sultan Tapar. What was possibly the first jihad against the Crusader states was led by the new Atabeg of Mosul, Mordud. With him were the emirs of Alat and Hamadan. At first, the army marched against Edessa, but yet again found itself incapable of capturing the formidable fortress. Then they moved against Turbessel, led by Jocelyn of Courtenay, and besieged it. Lines were drawn and the defenders were tested. Before long, sickness began spreading throughout the siege camps, and the emir of Alat succumbed to illness. Almost immediately his followers left the army, while the emir of Hamadan also abandoned Mordud, hoping to gain Alat for himself. But before the diminished army could make their final assault, a messenger from Aleppo requested assistance against the Crusaders, who were on the verge of retaking the city. When Mordud got there, he was surprised to find that there were no Crusaders to speak of. Worse still, Ridwan refused to open his gates.
What the heck, Ridwan?
Instead, the army of Damascus, led by Togtekin, who also answered the call, joined the main host, giving it a much-needed boost.
Okay.
By this point, the Crusaders were able to unite their forces, as Tancred, King Baldwin, Count Bertrand of Tripoli, and Count Baldwin of Edessa merged their armies and
they're playing on the same team again.
Marched against the enemy near Shaizar. As soon as they were in sight, Mordud employed the traditional skirmishing tactics, sending wave after wave of horse archers to harass the Crusaders. But after years spent fighting the Seljuks, the Crusader resolve prevailed, and they refused to give chase, instead locking their arrows and establishing a defensive perimeter. Small-scale charges were utilized only if the enemy got too close, and never overextended. The battle became a standoff. Day after day, the Crusaders held the line, despite the harassment. The Seljuks waited for opportune moments to attack
how do you break this, though?
Them, like when the knights were watering their horses by the Orontes River. After 2 weeks, with supplies running low, Baldwin gave the order, and the Crusaders fell back to Apamea. Even during their withdrawal, every contingent of the Crusaders held the formation until the Seljuk soldiers were completely demoralized. With 2 major contingents abandoning the army, and after gaining absolutely no spoils, The warriors refused to follow their commander, and the Seljuks accepted defeat as they pulled back. The Battle of Shaizar was a clear message to the Crusaders' enemies. Despite their rivalries, low numbers, and limited resources, the Crusaders preferred Latin neighbours to Islamic or Byzantine ones, and they were here to stay.
Wow. That's what we'll stop today. Really just talked, the jihad against the Crusaders is like a small part of that. Mainly just, we talked about, the back and forth of what's going on in Levant. Alexio's trying to cover some ground here. He's definitely has ambition, but he's got to deal with this, and then he's got to deal with that, and there's just so much back and forth. You got people dying, and then you got the people replacing the people that are dying, and then you got to keep it all together. Then you got people like Kilij Aslan going off trying to be a hero. He dies. Bohemond's basically dead. Raymond's dead. Baldwin's still alive from what I can see. Tancred's still alive what I can see. Tripoli doesn't have a ruler for I guess he has that 14-year-old son, but that's about it. Guys, thank you guys so much for watching. I appreciate you watching this much. We got one more episode, and then this will be it for the First Crusade. Hope you have a great one. Peace out.